Okay, we are on.
All right. So good morning, everybody. This is March 31st, and it's House Ways and Means Committee. Welcome, everyone. And I'm going to start just by talking a little bit about some notes that the speaker has sent to all of us. I'm not sure if members got it or not, or whether it just went to chairs. So let me just go over it. One of the things that a couple of things that she recommends that I think we've actually been pretty good on is really using these sessions partly to get used to this platform because if we get to a point where the full house is meeting remotely, which as you know depends on the second vote that we're going to do, but if we get to that point, we are going to be on this platform for debate. And so the being able to use the hand raise icon rather than just waving, and being able, remembering to mute and unmute in terms of having some kind of orderly debate with 150 members is going to be really critical. So we're working on real legislation because we have real issues in front of us, but we're also spending time learning the platform and getting used to it. And I think our committee, because we started last week, we're actually doing really well, but we're going to continue to do that. Be sure you mute when you're not talking. And in terms of chairing it, as of today, I'm now a co-host with Sorcia. Sorcia is still going to control the page. I'm not going to try to put documents up and take them down. She's much better at that than I am. But it does give me a little more ability to at least be able to work with the mute buttons and so on, which may be helpful to her. The other thing I wanted to, well, let me pause for questions and let me see if anyone has a question about just in terms of process and concerns about sort of how this is working for all of you. I'd be interested in. Anyone? No? Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention was the schedule. We had hoped to do 10 o'clock in the morning every morning. That's going to work today and tomorrow. It won't work Thursday and Friday because we're going to do joint sessions, and I need to pull up the schedule here. But we're going to do joint sessions first with House Education on Thursday, and that will be at 2 in the afternoon. And then we're going to do a joint session with House Appropriations on Friday, and that's going to be 9 in the morning. And the purpose of the joint sessions are twofold. Partly, we have a lot of overlapping issues. The issues around education are really pretty big, and their concerns very much overlap with ours. And just to put it very basically, we need to figure out how to finance and fund our schools at a really critical time when things are changing very rapidly for them. And the issues with the Appropriations Committee also overlap because the way the federal money is going to be allocated and the impact on revenue is all, well, I don't need to explain it to all of you because I know you know it very much sort of intermingled. So Kate and I thought it would be a good idea to meet jointly. It will give us a little practice with having a few more people on the session. And then Kitty and I had the same thought. But I had tried to set up a joint meeting with Senate Finance on some of the issues we're going to talk about this week, but they're still doing their morning afternoon schedule and we weren't able to do it, but we'll try to do that. Just partly because we've got limited staff and all the administration people are having to be available all the time for all these meetings. It also made sense to try to do as much as we could in joint meetings. So we'll keep working away at that. So questions about the schedule from anybody? No? Okay. So today we are starting, I wanted to flag quickly tomorrow morning at 10, one of the really important things we're going to get is an update from TAX about how they're doing collecting the trust taxes that got delayed. That's something they've been watching. I was in touch with Craig yesterday, and he asked for an additional day to get some additional data. So we'll do that first thing tomorrow. So Abby and Graham are on this morning. What I thought we would do is talk about the miscellaneous tax bill, which was basically ready to vote, but we're keeping it open in case there were other issues we needed to add to it. We're not going to vote anything out of committee at this stage anyway, because we haven't got a process for dealing with it when it gets to the floor yet. But I thought it would be helpful for Abby to sort of go back to the bill, ask committee members to think about the things in the bill that are non-controversial, that seem critical to address. You know, as we move along, we have more time, we may be able to look at things that are not as critical, but we just don't know. So at the moment, we're focusing on the things that we really have to do. So I could get Abby and Graham, and I don't know what order you two want to do it in. I'll let you decide to get us started with that.
Sure, I could start.
George, before you start, go ahead. George?
Yeah, so in terms of the voting, when are we going to go through how we do that in committee?
Great question. The Everbridge, I think the way we're going to do it is with Everbridge. Sorcia may know better than I do. I think that's been installed but not implemented. But we can do straw votes now. The voting, when we get to the floor, the debate will all be on Zoom on this platform. Voting itself will be on Everbridge, and I think that's what's being planned for the committee. But we're not taking formal votes yet, and so by the time we do, we'll have training in whatever system it is we're going to use.
I believe IT is going to be scheduling a training with our committee at some point, but I don't have that date yet. Okay.
Good. Thanks, Sorcia. Sam.
I was going to say that I did like a kind of a preliminary Everbridge training, and I asked that question, and they seemed to think that we would do kind of just like a voice vote like we normally do in committee. It actually seemed like the Everbridge thing would be a little complicated for a committee vote.
It might be.
That actually just reading the list of 11 names and saying yay or nay would probably be a lot easier for a committee. So, which is the way we do it normally. So I don't know. That's just what was my impression. Yeah.
And if we get to that, thank you. If we get to that place, which we will, we're going to have to vote, obviously. Sorcia will work with Robin and try to figure out sort of how we go about doing that. But yeah, I think you're probably right, just voting. And we always take a roll call when we take a formal position in committee anyway. George, are you back on? No. I don't lower your hand.
So I don't know, but Sorcia, can there be more than one co-host so that Robin could co-host to do a roll call vote? Or maybe Janet just goes through the list of names and Robin records them. But if there could be more than one co-host, then Robin could.
I can just unmute and do it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's all we need to do is unmute and do each one.
Right. For some reason, I've lost my participant list here, which is annoying. But okay. Other questions? Nope. Okay. Abby.
Great. Good morning. Are we still required to say our name for the record? I've been sort of remiss in doing that, so I can't. Abby Shepherd, Legislative Council.
Official meeting.
I assume we're still being recorded and it's a public meeting. So I have been reviewing the miscellaneous tax bill, that you have the section by section and the language online. And I was also discussing this with both Graham and Mark yesterday because there are quite a few property tax provisions in there. There aren't any critical, urgent pieces of this, really, given the COVID-19 situation. The only section in the miscellaneous tax bill right now that probably needs to be kept in the back of, sort of on the back burner, is the annual link up to the federal income tax code. And that, of course, depends on what the legislature wants to do, whether it should be kept at 2018 or if it should be updated to 2019. So that's a policy decision. It depends on what's coming down and what parts you want to link up to, given all of the changes at the federal level over the last month. Otherwise, there are a few sort of more technical, logical changes. The one that has to do with property tax that seems like it would give, it's really a very minor change, is allowing towns, it's the very first section, allowing towns to make corrections to the grand list. It gives them one extra day, December 31st. And there are some other sort of more technical changes, such as for sales and use tax, the remote seller definition and the marketplace facilitator definition. There was a change from any to the preceding 12 months. So that might be something you'd want to include, but these are very minor changes. I believe the tax department has been administering it as though it were currently a the, so that they're looking at, so I'm not sure that this is really urgent, but those are some probably logical changes to make. There also, the committee sort of towards the end of working on this bill had been looking at the 529 plans and had made some changes there. And there was one change for death and disability of beneficiaries, that they're allowed to take distributions. Again, that might be sort of an equity issue that you might want to take action on, but these are very specific provisions. And then really that's, I can walk through the whole bill if that's useful, but those, I just wanted to highlight those few small provisions, and Graham might have things to add as well.
Abby, the other one that occurred to me might be important to do is the change in the use tax table.
That did have a fairly significant impact, I believe. Let's see. The way that the committee had landed on was slightly different from what the administration proposed. So had changed the safe harbor to 0.05% of adjusted gross income above $20,000 of AGI.
So we didn't have a use tax at those low income levels. And just given how in flux the sales tax is at the moment, and the fact that nobody can drive to anywhere to buy stuff, it did seem that maybe that was one, if we were going to move something, that was a piece that just popped in my head that we might want to move. I see some head nodding, sort of whatever. Let me see if there's anybody else who wants to ask a question about the miscellaneous tax bill, things that you remember that were in there. Slight pause here. Yes, Peter.
I noticed in the section dealing with the 529 plans, it's roughly page 14, line 6. It uses a term of art, which is something like the recapture would occur unless, and then it lists a bunch of things. The beneficiary is the one that Abby just mentioned, but the other one that struck me, it can be used only for cost of attendance, I think the term of art is. And I just wanted to be sure that that is a term of art and it's broad enough to include a lot of the qualified expenditures that are listed in the VSAC brochure, which is what people use essentially to make a decision to put in their money, which includes books, supplies, equipment required for the school, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to me that cost of attendance may be a confining phrase. I just want to be sure that there's a sync between what we're doing and what VSAC has put out there in terms of allowable withdrawal expenditures. Thanks.
Robin, and then I've got Jim after that.
I guess mine's more of a process question, because I think what's in here is good. And if we're talking about priorities within the bill, but if we've gone to taken all the testimony and sort of come to agreement on all these pieces in the bill, is there any reason we wouldn't vote out the whole thing and versus picking pieces of it? That's what I'm a little unclear about.
Yeah, and I'll confess that I'm unclear about it as well. I think the difficulty is that we don't know exactly what the process is going to be like on the floor. And so, although we've worked through a lot of these sections, a lot of them deal with local issues or issues that are, that people may have questions about. And so it may be the whole thing can go, and it is fine. We've basically come to agreement on probably 99% of it, if not all of it. But the question really is whether it can be managed on the floor. So that's the only reason why we wouldn't do it.
Okay.
Not because in this case, it's not because it's controversial.
Right.
It's just the ability to manage it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Jim and then George. Jim, you have to unmute. Jim, unmute, please.
Yes, Janet.
Thank you.
Okay. All
Okay, you're on.
right. Little simple question, I think. Section 15 of the side-by-side says 1 month extension for filing income tax returns when a taxpayer demonstrate that a federal filing extension has been granted. Why did we settle on 1 month? Because the federal extensions are longer than that.
Can I answer that?
Yeah. Good.
Sure. So I actually meant to flag that this description is actually prior. It was an older iteration. This is the one mistake in the section by section. I apologize. The 1 month is just for corporate filers because that's what was initially proposed.
Okay.
And then the committee added for individual as well. So it allows for any taxpayer to follow the federal extension, and then corporations, instead of 30 days, get 1 month. It was a recommendation from COST, Council on State Taxation, I believe. And they had proposed that so that because of the, because it ended up falling, I think, on October 31st, or there was something odd with the months, the way that 30 days rolled over. So it's actually a 6 month extension following the federal, and then an extra month for corporations. So I will fix that in the section by
Okay.
section.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. George.
So Abby, at the end of the document that we have today, the section by section, there's about a dozen sections that don't have a check mark beside them.
On the final page,
Yes.
or?
Well, we have
so-
the judiciary fees,
Mhm.
and then we have another page with a handful of things.
Correct. So the judiciary fees had just been discussed, I think, in the final week, right before the legislature adjourned. There was not a vote that I was aware of, so I hadn't put any checks. I think there was general consensus, but I didn't want to check those off without more direction. The effective dates, I assume that those would flow through. I hadn't put check marks on those, but those are necessary to get the other sections to take effect on the correct dates. The final page is for all of the proposals that were removed that have been proposed by the administration, just to keep track of what was in and what's been taken out.
Let me see if there's other questions. One other sort of comment I'd throw out there, and I haven't gone through this with a fine tooth comb yet, but where we've made changes, even where there's agreement and there's good policy and so on, if it's going to require administrative work to make it happen, I think we need to at least check and see whether there is staff and the ability to implement. It's just a different world that we're in right now. So we may have something that's just great, but it requires a tweak in the software, or it requires, standing up a new program. Those we may be asked to delay on indefinitely until we can until things are functioning more normally. And I don't know, I haven't had that conversation with the speaker, and I haven't had the conversation with tax department or any other agency, but this just occurs to me that we just need to be really careful. Anyone else? Any other hands up? I don't think so. So Graham, let me go to you and see what you want to add to
Good
that.
morning. For the record, I'm Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office. I don't have a whole lot to add on what Abby has said. I think the things that sort of stuck out in my mind, like Abby said, were the federal link up language. Although I think I'm still trying to process that, and I would, I guess, say that it might be good to move cautiously on this, because there were a lot of changes in the Federal CARES Act, which is the most recent stimulus bill that made quite a few income tax changes and corporate income tax changes that might flow through to us. And so I think it might be prudent to move a little bit cautiously on that one. Although I'm not 100% sure whether if you did that now, whether that would have any bearing on what you did down the road, because some of those federal changes would affect us when taxpayers filed in April of 2021. And so I still need to think through that one a little bit more. The other one, like you said, Madam Chair, was the use tax table update. And just for reference for the committee, on the fiscal note that I was working on for this, I had that as a revenue decrease in the sales tax of up to $1 million. It could be a little bit more now because you're having probably a lot more online sales at the moment because a lot of retailers are closed. And so people might have actually more use tax potentially liability, but given that it's coming from marketplace facilitators for a lot of these, we might be, okay. But even before that, I had it about up to $1 million, could be less. But a surprising number of taxpayers still use the use tax table. So in 2018, we had about 45,000 people pay use tax, and about 28,000 of those used the table. And so that's been roughly consistent over the years, even when we changed the table, I think back in 2016 or 17. So there are still a lot of people who use the safe harbor tables. And so to the extent that those people will be paying less on the table, then to be a decrease in the sales tax. The other factor on that is, it's possible that Tom Cavett, when he builds in his forecast, are already building in some decrease in the use tax because we have a lot better compliance through market-based facilitators and whatnot. So, but at the moment, I have that as a revenue decrease of about $1 million on the sales tax. And that's really the only revenue piece in the bill. And then the other provisions, I don't necessarily, from my knowledge, see them as absolutely critical to pass. The only one other thing that I maybe gave a second thought to was there's a provision with the property transfer tax in here that the payments are due within 30 days for controlling interest transactions, and that's something that we passed last year. I don't know how necessary that is at the moment. It might just be an administrative thing for the tax department. So I think the bottom line, as I would sum this up, is that the only major thing that seems potentially essential is the annual link up. However, I would stress caution on that, and then maybe the use tax tables, but that seems more almost like a policy decision for the committee, whether we want to lower those tables, rather than if we didn't change those, then people would just be using the safe harbor tables and paying 0.1%, which may not be totally fair, but it wouldn't cause the tax system to sort of have issues or create errors or anything like that. So I think those are the only things I would add.
Okay. Let me pause and see if there are questions. Anyone? I'll give people a minute to think. Looks like Sam has a question.
I think I'm getting it right, that the reason that we should use caution in linking up this year is that we don't know what the feds are gonna do with the income tax code. I mean, they already made one big change, but we don't know what else they might do, and to take a little pause on that and maybe link up retroactively after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a good way of putting it. I mean, it may not, changing this language does not preclude the legislature from decoupling any way, like, let's say one of the federal changes is an above the line charitable deduction. The committee might decide to do the link up language and then just decouple from that. I don't think anything precludes you from doing that. But I think on March 31st, it might be, prudent to just exercise a little bit of caution just to make sure that your annual link up doesn't, box you in, and for future tax years.
And I think one of the things for Abby and Graham is just to be sort of keeping I know you are, but a running list of the kinds of issues that we might want to think twice about when we link up. Just the things that are going to cost money or the things that are significant policy changes. Let me see if there's anyone else. Give you all a minute. No? Great. Thank you both very much. And right on schedule, we're going to actually switch to Mark, who is going to talk about the proposed federal education stabilization grant. That's a mouthful. But Mark, you all set to go ahead? Oops, you're muted though. We can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So again, for the record, Mark Peralta, Joint Fiscal Office. Do you have the document that I sent over earlier today? Okay. So it's a 3-page document, starting with page 1. Page 1 provides sort of an overview of the entire Emergency Education Relief Fund that was passed, I guess, on the 27th of March. And the package is basically to prepare for, prevent, respond to COVID-19, but a lot of the provisions are pretty broad. So, oops, what am I looking at here?
Mark, we're getting it up on the screen.
Okay, I'll hang up. I'll look at the blank screen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, Mark, give me a second. My Wi-Fi, my DSL is a little slow this morning.
Okay.
And for anybody who's got a second device, this is a good moment to use it. There you go.
Okay, again, as I mentioned, the total package is $30.75 billion nationwide, and there are actually 6 components of that. I'm going to talk in detail about 2 of them, the 2 that are highlighted in red, but I wanted you to see what the whole package is so you can just get a sense of what it looks like. So in terms of emergency relief funds, there's a Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, which I will go over. There's an elementary and secondary education emergency relief fund. I will also go over that. But there's also a higher education emergency relief fund, which includes almost half of the money. That I don't have any more information on, and it seemed like for the committees, right now for the committee, it seemed more important to go over the first 2. And then these last 3 on here, these reservations, they're relatively small amounts of money for specific purposes or specific recipients. The only one that Vermont may be able to get a piece of is the reservation for competitive grants to states with the highest burden. But again, that would require an application. And again, I don't have any more information on that right now. So I'm going to talk out of the $30.75 billion. There's 13 available for K through 12 education, and there's another almost $3 billion available for this Governor's Emergency Relief Fund. Whoops.
We all lost everything. Let's take a breath. We'll get it back up.
Okay.
That, we're all back?
Go back. Okay, so we can move on to page 2. I have some more information about the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, which is part of the bill. And wait for that to come up.
No, it's not there. Sorry.
Sorry, Mark, where are we in the document?
It's right there. You've got
Right
it.
there. That's it. You've got it
Okay.
right there.
Good.
Okay, so on this page, you can see that the federal appropriation is 13.23 billion. Vermont's allocation of that amount is $31.15 million. So it's a good chunk of money that should be available. That money is going to be allocated. It is allocated to states on the basis of their share of grants under Title 1A of the ESCEA, which is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act at the federal level. So based on that allocation, that's where we come up with the $31.15 million.
Mark, can I interrupt you and ask a question? What other money goes out through ESEA for those of us who are not that familiar with it?
I'm not that familiar with it either. So I'll have to go back and answer that question to you because it does come up because one of the allowable uses of funds is any activity authorized by the ESEA. So it would be important to know that. But there's a long list of stuff that can be paid for out of that. So I can pull that together, but I don't have it.
Okay, Jim has a question. Jim, you have to unmute.
Sorry. Am I unmuted? Yes, okay. Mark, can you very briefly describe Title I ESEA? How's it work? Is there anything tricky about it?
Yeah, I'm going to have to do some more work on that. It's a federal program. I'm not familiar with all the details of it, so I'll have to come back to you with more information. For the purposes of what you're looking at now, though, all it determined was the allocation of the $13.23 billion to the states. The allocation under Title 1A of the ESEA was used as the mechanism to allocate the money that goes out to each individual state.
So would it be reasonable to assume that our school boards know how that works? I can just ask them, I suppose.
Maybe, but they don't really need to. I mean, they're going to get a grant, and it's going to be X numbers of dollars. So how it was arrived at is probably of less importance than the amount of money they're getting. But they may be familiar with it. I'm not sure.
Good for now. Thank you.
Okay.
Peter has a question. Peter, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm reminded of Steve Klein's overview of this before the detailed information that Mark just presented became available. And that sort of gross question has to do with how we spend down what is called in this legislation and commonly the maintenance of effort money, and which pot can we use the federal money to backfill or restore or replenish, or are we not allowed to replenish? If we're not allowed to replenish, then it seems to me the allowable list that Jim just referred to and Mark did probably can easily exhaust the current, maintenance of effort. And then we would begin to think about things that were not part of our maintenance and effort, like some of the deferred maintenance and whatnot expenditures that we all know are out there. We just haven't got our arms around the details. Thank you.
So I want to let Mark do this money is a little bit different. The reason we're talking about ESEA is that it's the formula that ESEA uses that is being used to distribute this money, not that this is ESEA money. So I interrupted first, but I'm going to go right back to Mark and let him go through the presentation before we get too off in the field here about.
Representative Anthony, it's a good question, and I'll come back to it. It's pretty complicated in this case, and I'm not sure we have an answer yet, but I am going to talk a little bit about it because there's different pots of money that have different rules that are going to apply to them. So in terms of the total allocation to the state, the $31 million, 90% of that money is going to be awarded to school districts. And I'll come back to that in a minute because it's important. And the other 10% may be reserved for the Agency of Education to address any issues responding to COVID-19 and administrative costs as well. Now, on that 90%, what's significant there is that my reading of the federal law is that that money will go to the Agency of Education and then directly out to school districts that are owed it. So not only do we not have any say over the formula or the way the money is allocated to individual districts, the money also does not pass through the education fund, goes directly to the district. So that's an issue we're going to have to wrestle with a little bit. In terms of the allowable use of funds, I've listed 12 different things here. I won't walk through them unless you want me to, but it's pretty broad. In addition to anything authorized by ESEA, there are a bunch of specific COVID-19 related costs that this money could be used for.
Mark,
Sure.
I know you need to do it quickly, but I think, why don't you go through it?
Go through it?
Just so people can hear it. I think it might be
Okay.
useful.
So again, one, any activity authorized by ESEA, and I will get back to you on that to find out what's encompassed there, but it's pretty broad. And then COVID-19 related stuff, a coordination of preparedness and response efforts of school districts with the state to improve a coordinated response to prevent, prepare for, or respond to COVID-19, providing principals with the resources they need for their individual schools, activities to address the needs of low-income kids, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, and students experience homelessness, and foster care youth, everybody. Developing and implementing procedures and systems to improve the preparedness and response effort of local school districts, training of professionals, training of professional development for staff of school districts on sanitation and minimizing the spread of infectious diseases, purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean the facilities, planning for and coordinating during long-term closures, including how to provide meals for eligible students, technology for online learning, and guidance under the IDEA, which is the special education law at the federal level. Purchasing education technology, including connectivity for students served by districts, and for substantive interaction between students and instructors, including low-income students and students with disabilities, providing mental health services, planning and implementing activities related to summer learning or supplemental after-school programs, and any other activities necessary to maintain the operation of and the continuity of service in school districts, and continuing to employ existing staff of the school district. So that's a pretty broad list of uses. You could probably shoehorn just about anything into one of those categories. Any questions on any of this so far?
Let me look.
Okay, so
Scott has a question. Scott, go ahead.
Hey, Mark.
Hi, Scott.
Okay, so one question I have is, it looks like there's a lot of flexibility in there. What about our school districts that send a significant or their portion of their students to independent schools? Do you see any problems with the districts still supporting those kids even though they're in independent schools, not public schools?
I don't think so, but it's a good question. I shouldn't answer it off the cuff. I'll look into it for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? No. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, so then in terms of details on this, there is a maintenance of effort provision that provides that the state has to assure the federal government that it will maintain support for elementary and secondary education in fiscal years 2020 and 21, at least at the level of such support that is the average of support provided in the three fiscal years preceding the date of enactment, which was the 27th. So we will need to look into that to make sure that we don't, trip over that piece. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but again, we need to spend a little more time looking at it. Last thing, the application from the agency or from the governor's office, I think, is due 30 days after enactment. So this is going to be moving fast. And the applications must be acted upon within 30 days of receipt. So we're talking about as much as 2 months out before this money actually would get to districts, but at least they would know that something's coming. And then any funds not awarded within a year of the 27th date, you use it or you lose it after a year.
Mark, do you know whether this money can be used in both fiscal 20 and fiscal 21?
I believe it can be, yes. It's going to be awarded within a year, but I think it can be used over the remainder of this fiscal year and next year.
And is the Agency of Education working on information that would tell us how much is getting allocated to each district?
Not yet, as far as I know. I put in a request to find out if they've thought about doing that, but I don't know yet.
But that would be a possible next step, so that each SU or each district would have that information.
Yeah, this money would be divided over 115 school districts, and the money would go out to them on the same basis as it was distributed to the state, which is based on that allocation of aid under the ESEA Title I.
Let's see if there's any questions. No? Go ahead.
Okay, on the next page then, the other bill that directly affects schools is this Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. Now, this money is allocated slightly differently, or not slightly differently than the ESEA money. 60% of it is based on share of individuals ages 5 through 24 in the state, and 40% is based on the share of children counted, again, in the ESEA. And I don't know the details of that section in the ESEA, but that's why our allocation is different. Our allocation under this formula is 0.15% of the total. Our allocation under the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund was 0.2354%. So we get less money under this provision. The money goes to the governor. I think it's up to his discretion as to how to use it. But there's also the allowable use of funds is broken up into some different categories. So all of it does not, even the amount, the $4.5 million that Vermont would get under this does not go, all of it doesn't all go to elementary and secondary schools, or it doesn't have to. Some of it goes to elementary and secondary schools for emergency support. And it's the Agency of Education that makes that determination. It also is available to provide emergency support through grants to institutions of higher education. That's within the governor's discretion. And then there's this catch-all category and below, and I'm not sure exactly what to make out of it, but it says any education-related agency, including higher ed school districts or education-related entity in the state, which the governor deems essential for carrying out emergency educational services. So there would be some part of that $4.45 million pot that may be available for school districts. Again, same maintenance of effort provisions, same application process, same reallocation of money. And I just should mention that the estimates for Vermont share that I'm using are based on a Congressional Research Service document that was released on March 25th. So they're still estimates at this point, but I think they're pretty solid at this point.
I see Robin has a question.
Thank you. Mark, it looks like in that allowable use of funds in that third bullet, childcare is included in there too. And that's the first time I've seen help for childcare, which is certainly one of the big issues we're dealing with right now. It's not, am I correct that it's not included in the elementary and secondary, but it's just included here?
I'm looking right now because I thought it might have been included, but you may be right. Yes. Yes.
Okay,
That's right.
that seems to be a critical use of funds, just my opinion. Thanks.
But we still don't know whether the childcare that's being provided for the children of essential workers is coming out of the education fund or the general fund. Is that right?
That's right. I haven't heard anything other than school districts will be reimbursed, but
Yeah.
there hasn't been any more specificity about which fund that money would come out of and also how much. I mean, the language was describing school districts that need supplemental assistance. I don't know how that definition, how that will be determined either.
Yeah.
But it could be that some of this money could be used for that purpose.
Right. Emily?
Just got covered, thanks.
Oh, okay. Let me see if there's other questions here. I think so. Mark, I don't know. Did you get through everything or did we interrupt you?
Yeah, I mean, that's all I know about this at this point. So that, I could talk a little bit, the problem I flagged earlier about this money going directly to school districts and not through the education fund just begs the question of, how are we going to work that? When we went through the last, through the Great Recession, we received about $18.4 million in each year in 2010 and 2011. And again, that money went directly from the Agency of Education to the school districts. What we did at that time was we reduced the general fund transfer to the education fund by the same amount in both 2010 and 2011. So the school districts got the funds they were expecting and the education fund was basically made whole at that, or the problem in the education fund that was created was addressed that way. Right now, we no longer have a general fund transfer. We have dedicated revenues to the education fund. So we've been thinking through, how this is going to work in order to do this, because the money coming through here goes a long way towards closing, if it was used for it, to close the gap in 2020 that we have if that money had flowed through the fund. But again, I think it's an open question at this point how to deal with that.
So Mark, our sales tax revenue is going to be down by tens of millions, right? We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but why doesn't this just replace the sales tax money effectively?
Yeah, and there may be a provision, I have to go back and do some more, but there may be a provision against using this money to simply replace those funds. But I guess the main problem is that we're on the, we owe, we've already paid 2/3 out and the towns are owed their third payment on April 30th. So that money's coming out of the education fund.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
So regardless of how much we get in, we've got this much going out the door. And because this money bypasses the education fund and goes directly to the districts, it wouldn't show up, it wouldn't be available in the education fund to close the gap that's opened up there.
So I'm just throwing really bad ideas out there, but if we knew how much each district was going to receive, can we just say that third payment is that we netted out, that they get what they would have gotten minus what they're going to get?
Yeah, I think that would be a possibility. I don't know if there's any restrictions in the law, or I don't know if that triggers problems with the maintenance of effort provisions, but
Sure.
or the use of this money. But it's a good question. I can do some more work on it. But it's
Yeah.
one of those issues that's flagged, but we haven't gotten that far down into the weeds yet to figure out how it would actually work. But
Right.
unlike the last time we did it, it's not possible to deal. It's not possible to deal with it the way we did last time. The
Right.
only way to deal with it at this point would be to restrict the money going out the door.
Yeah.
At least in 2020. FY21 may be different.
Yep, right. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Is this the only money that's available for pre-K through 12 so far?
Yeah, it's the only money I'm aware of so far. Yeah.
Bill? No, Emily. Sorry, Emily.
Thanks. The way it's allocated to states, the section that's not based on the ESEA, the definition of individuals under the CARES Act is, I assume that's different from how we define individuals in schools. And I'm curious if it's literally one-to-one with people, or if there's some other version of weighting that the feds use.
I don't know the answer to that question. I can look. I'm just assuming it's a head count of people between 5 and 24.
Anything else? Any other questions anyone has? Just looking through my list. No? Anything else that you have for us right now, Mark, that can help us figure out what problems we need to solve and what tools there are? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Committee, what I had hoped to do with the rest of our morning was to hear from tax about the update on the trust taxes. But as I explained when we first got on the call, we're not going to have that information until tomorrow. So other than hearing from the committee about things that you would like to put on the agenda over the next 2 or 3 days, I don't have anything else for this particular meeting. No. Anybody got anything? I have Jim Aslan. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd just be curious to know, Janet, kind of where you want to head over the next week or so. And I don't know that that's easy to state, but I always work better if I know where the path is.
Sure. We talked about a little bit when we first got on.
Yeah,
and the what we're going to be doing this week, we've got 2 joint meetings. We've got one Thursday and one Friday. Tomorrow we're going to hear from, I've got to pull the agenda back up here, but we're going to hear from tax tomorrow, and I can't remember what the other subject is at the moment. We are, the joint meetings are with House Ed and with Senate House Appropriations Thursday and Friday, and the timings change. So check the schedules for that. What we're doing, the full House has not yet voted on doing remote voting. And so we're not going to do anything official out of the committee until we know what the floor is going to look like. A lot of what we're doing right now is trying to get our arms around what feels to me like the biggest issue in front of us, which is how we finance our schools, and also continue to look at the due dates on various taxes, and get used to the platform, getting people used to the hand raising, to the muting, and so on. So that's anybody else can remember what else I said.
That's good. That's good for now.
Mark, you've got something, and then Robin, I'm going to go back to you.
Well, I just wanted to let you know that I just received an email from Stephanie Barrett, who's been tracking the childcare issue, and she said that we have $4.3 million available to address that. So I'm not sure what the source of the fund is, CCDF, but there is some money other than what I've gone over this morning that would be available to offset childcare costs.
Other than that money that you talked about just now. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That's good. Robin.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe this is going to happen on Friday with appropriations, but when Steve Klein came and talked to us this past Friday, it was sort of the first blush of what we think is happening with all the money. And that's when we got the sense that this isn't revenue replacement and all of that. And I'm wondering if he's going to have more clarification for us, and will we be hearing from him again as they start to understand it more so they can explain it to us.
Yeah, and that part of the meeting, the joint meeting with House Appropriations on Friday, Kitty and I have been talking a fair amount about sort of what her committee needs for information, how it relates to what we need, and how we can work together. So staff is working incredibly hard to try to figure all this out and give us the best guidance they can. And that's why we set up this Friday meeting, so that at some point, all 22 of us will be hearing the same information. And I suspect that whatever I think is going to be available on Friday will have changed by noon today, because that's how quickly things are changing.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let me see if anybody else has a question. And I just want to say to the committee how much I appreciate people's patience and forbearance and willingness to adapt to a very new way of working. I don't know about all of you, but I find this way of meeting really tiring. And I don't think I could do it for a full day. It's very different. And I can't say how grateful I am to everybody for being willing to be here and work with this. So I just wanted to say thanks. Jim.
Your comments well taken. I appreciate having the documents the evening before. I'm actually maybe better prepared than I was sitting in committee because I have time here at home to read them and find reasonably good questions to ask.
Yeah.
And so, yes.
That's all Sorsha. That's not me.
I know. Well, Shor's is listening in, I'm sure.
She is.
The point being, we do what we have to. And so there it goes.
Yeah. George.
I've been looking and I just found something from the Congressional Research Service about the act that we're talking about, the ESEA, as it has been amended. This was from October of 2019. And it looks like there's a fair amount of flexibility in there, but I will send the link to Sorsha and then maybe she can distribute it if anybody else wants to try and look at this.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else from anybody? I guess, so if not, we will end the meeting and plan to see everybody at 10 tomorrow. Please jump on a couple minutes early, just in case there's some technical things I need to sort through before we get started. So that would be really helpful if you could do that. Great. Thanks all.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I'm ending the
Bye,
live stream
everybody.
now.